Okay, the 12th entry into the MCU in chronological order is the 11th film of the greater MCU, and that is Avengers Age of Ultron, the sequel to the 2012 movie. Once again, Josh Whedon returns to write and direct the sequel. Okay, so Age of Ultron is one of those movies that you either like it or you either hate it. This movie's gone down in infamy as being one of the more debated movies of the MCU, more or less in terms of how this movie was overall handled and the story that it ended up overall telling. At the end of the day, I overall like Age of Ultron. I mean, when compared to the first movie, I think the first movie is much more stronger. But Age of Ultron does do things that I did really like. I think the villain compared to Loki is much better in this movie, though I think his plan can be very, very convoluted and it just has too many moving parts. And there's also a long stretch of this film where just it goes on a really just big exposition dump, and it shoehorns the Vision character towards the end of the movie, going into the third act. So it does do a lot of like things that slow the plot down and convolute the story a little bit. Now, does that take away from my overall experience of this movie? No, because at the end of the day, it does have things that I legitimately like. So I'm going to go over my pros and my cons for Avengers Age of Ultron. All right, pros first. The cast in this movie, great. The original team reunites in this thing, and they're just as good in this as they were in the first Avengers movie. I actually think in this, the camaraderie is much more refined. The character bantering is actually much more humorous and much more wittier. Uh, like everyone in this cast is very comfortable with one another. Their different personalities mesh mesh so well, and you buy them as being like close colleagues, and a lot of them having close relationships as friends. So I like all that stuff. It really shows when they're having this dinner party and everyone's trying to pick up Thor's hammer. That's where everyone in the cast really has a chance to show off the fun side of their characters, and they just act like real friends, just enjoying each other's company. So I enjoyed all that stuff. I like all that stuff. The core team, Hawkeye, Black Widow, Captain America, Hulk, Iron Man, and Thor, they all have their moments to shine, and their personalities all mesh really, really well together. Uh, in terms of how their own individual stories go, I think they're handled fairly well. Hawkeye is better utilized in this movie than it was in the Avengers movie. We find out that Hawkeye has a family that has been kept hidden thanks to Nick Fury and Shield, and we pretty much get more of a sense of his character. Like, he does what he does for his family, and everything is for his family. And he has more to lose when compared to all the other members of the Avengers, because he's a family man first, and he's a hero second. So I like all that stuff, and I also like the interactions that he has with Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, played by Elizabeth Olsen and Aaron Taylor Johnson. Specifically, the more fatherly type of role he plays to Scarlet Witch in some scenes, and I also like the the little bit of a rivalry he has with Quicksilver, with the running joke of Quicksilver telling Hawkeye that he's old and slow. So I think that stuff was actually pretty funny. So yeah, I like Jeremy Renner in this movie. He has a lot more to do. He has a lot more quippy lines to him, and he just has a chance to show off his charisma and just be a badass in the third act of the movie as well. So yeah, I got no complaints on how Jeremy Renner was handled in this movie with his character of Hawkeye. Much better than how it was in the first Avengers movie. Uh, how Hulk and Black Widow was handled in this movie. I like the Hulk in this movie. He's more. I like Hulk in this movie. He has a lot of fun scenes, specifically where he gets mind controlled and starts destroying Johannesburg. That scene's a lot of fun, where Iron Man is doing whatever he can to try and calm him down. But I also like this budding romance between Black Widow and Hulk. These are two characters who are very damaged, and they cannot have any sort of a normal life, because in their mind they're both monsters. No, Bruce Banner sees himself as a monster because he literally turns into a monster, and Black Widow sees herself a monster because of her training by the Red Room, and the fact that she can no longer, and the fact that she can't have a family of her own. That makes her almost inhuman to herself. So having those two have a relationship is actually pretty interesting, because they both view themselves as being these horrific, having horrific qualities, but yet they have good qualities as well, because they're still human and they still have emotions. I like how Bruce Banner, of course, he's not really into the idea, because he knows that he can lose control. That if he can lose control, it could spell disaster. But you have Black Widow, who's willing to take that chance. So I kind of like this budding romance between Widow and Hulk. I mean, it does come out of nowhere. Some might think it comes out of nowhere, but if you watch the first Avengers movie, they kind of laid the groundwork a little bit without fully going into it. I mean, I love how Betty Ross is completely just wiped away from existence because Bruce Banner just forgets that he had a love interest before Black Widow, and there's like not one mention of her at all, which is kind of a shame. Like, where the hell's Betty Ross? Give Betty Ross some cred. I don't care if she's coming back for new and Captain America 4. Where is she now? She gets no love. Uh, but yeah, but Widow and Hulk, they do got some cool scenes. You know, Widow's got some good scenes. Hulk has a lot of badass scenes, particularly when the Johannesburg fight with Iron Man, and in the third act where he's ripping apart Ultron bots. So yeah, the utilization of Hulk is pretty much no different than how he was in that first Avengers movie. You unleash him to wreak havoc and have visual eye candy, and for the most part, done well. Speaking of Iron Man, Iron Man, Tony Stark in this movie. The paranoia of Tony Stark reaches a whole new level with Age of Ultron because basically Stark and Banner basically created Ultron, with Stark being the more heavier force and Banner being more or less reluctant to do so. So, at the beginning of this movie, the Avengers track down Baron Strucker, who was introduced at the end of Winter Soldier, and they come across Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, who he was experimenting on, and gave them enhanced powers. You know, they find his fortress. They find that he has Loki's scepter, which was also revealed at the end of Winter Soldier. And through mind control, because of Scarlet Witch, Tony Stark has a vision in which the alien invasion kills all the Avengers, and Tony Stark failed to come up with a plan to save his friends and save the world. This, of course, is piggybacking off the paranoia that he had in Iron Man 3 because of his PTSD from the first Avengers movie. Now it's taken full effect to the point where he has where he wants to where he has the Iron Legion, and he has the idea to create Ultron, the ultimate peacekeeping entity. Now, of course, when Ultron becomes self-aware, he gets confused as to what he's supposed to do, so he ends up killing Jarvis, and he takes the mission of world peace as him having to kill and wipe out the Avengers. This is what leads to the conflict between the Avengers and Ultron. So, I kind of like it. I like the idea of Tony Stark creating the ultimate enemy for the Avengers. Now, how Josh Whedon ended up portraying Ultron and writing Ultron, that's the horse of a different color. But I'll get to that momentarily. So yeah, I like how Tony Stark inadvertently created one of the most dangerous foe for his team to fight throughout the course of the movie. So that was pretty done. That was pretty cool. Thor's in this movie, he's just there, you know, doing Thor things. His biggest scene is where he goes on this self-discovery, where he goes to find out something, and he has the help of Eric Selvig, and he has the vision of the Infinity Stones, and of a greater threat that's looming. That's pretty much all that Thor does, and plus he hangs out in the third act and does his battling. But I do like how the running gag of no one being able to pick up the hammer is paid off with Vision picking up the hammer and being worthy to do so. So that was fine. Like I said, Thor doesn't really do much in Age of Ultron except to just hang out with Eric Selvig, have a little vision about the Infinity Stones, have a greater threat, and stuff like that. Well, yeah, Thor doesn't really do much in this movie. Now, let's get on to the new additions, being Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. Aaron Taylor Johnson and Elizabeth Olsen, respectively. Now, this version of Quicksilver came out the same time that Evan Peters did his version of Quicksilver with the Fox X-Men franchise, and the version I prefer is Evan Peters. I thought Aaron Taylor Johnson as Pietro Maximoff was okay. I didn't really think it was all that special. And not only that, I don't think Josh Whedon really utilized Quicksilver's speed enough in this movie. Like, he didn't have his visual dynamic for Quicksilver in this film wasn't as dynamic as Bryan Singer's Quicksilver. Like, this version felt like the Flash, but without any coolness to it. You know, like the Evan Peters version actually had a cool factor to it, and Bryan Singer was creative at showcasing just how fast he can really be. Like, everything is moving slow to him because he's moving so fast. We don't get any of that with Quicksilver. He just comes across like the Flash, and we all know that the Flash and Quicksilver Quicksilver is a derivative of the Flash, whatever. But still, you could have been more creative about showcasing his powers and stuff like that. I mean, he does have some nice little character moments here and there. Johnson and Olsen have decent on-screen chemistry with one another as brother and sister. But aside from that, I thought Aaron Taylor Johnson just wasn't really all that fantastic as Quicksilver. He was okay at best. Elizabeth Olsen as Scarlet Witch. I liked her in the role. I like how they both start off evil and pawns for Ultron, but then turn to the side of the good when they find out that Ultron's ultimate plan is to pretty much wipe out the world. You have another world-ending plot. Where the hell's Captain Marvel? Ultron literally turned an entire city into a bomb to wipe out the human race, and Captain Marvel's nowhere to be found. Once again, I mean, Jesus Christ. Why did you put why did you have, whatever. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Where was it? Oh, yeah. Yeah, they defect to the Avengers when they find out that Ultron's endgame is to wipe out the entire human race. And of course, that was not the plan. The plan was just to kill off the Avengers and then go from there. Not for mass extinction. And they're not all for that game. And that's when they defect over to the good side, becoming enemies of Ultron. And this is where Ultron... But now, of course, while that's happening, this is where Ultron has the idea to create Vision to help him do his destruction thing. I forget why Ultron creates Vision. It's so convoluted, so confusing. Yeah, Ultron creates Vision, who is played by Paul Bettany. I like how Paul Bettany, who was Jarvis all throughout the MCU, he now gets to play a physical character in Vision. And I actually like the look of Vision. Vision comes across as really cool. I like his powers. I like how he's like the antithesis to Ultron. Like Ultron represents just evil, while Vision represents the good side of humanity, and you get those two conflicting personalities going up against each other. Like you got Vision's harmony and Ultron's just want to destroy. It's actually pretty good. It's pretty good. It's not that bad. What else in terms of the characters? So yeah, that's pretty much it in terms of the characters on the Avengers side. Now let's talk about Ultron. So, from an overall performance factor, I thought James Spader did a great job playing the character of Ultron in both his physical performance, since he did the motion capture work for the character for the majority of the movie, and from a vocal performance. I thought James Spader gave Ultron a menacing sarcasticness to him. I thought he came across as very, very menacing and a true legitimate force. I think what ultimately killed Ultron is that his personality is more or less like a darker version of Tony Stark. Like, it's okay for Ultron to have a dark sense of humor, but there are times where the humor sounded more or less like he's trying to mimic Tony Stark, and it comes across as just weird. like seeing this robot act like Tony Stark was weird. And not just act like Tony Stark, but there are actually moments where he's saying things that Tony would say, which kind of takes away his intimidation factor. And all of that, his overall plan to wipe out the Earth, it can get very, very convoluted in a lot of areas, especially since it deals with the Mind Stone and creating the Vision character, and then he turns a whole city into basically a world destructing bomb. So there's a lot of convolutedness to make his plan work. But again, I think as an overall performance, I like James Spader in the role. I think Ultron's more of a worthy foe than Loki was. Then again, when you actually watch the Avengers, Loki was more or less a pawn in a bigger chess game, and he was more or less acting like a general and not like the leader of anything else. So it's almost unfair to compare Loki to Ultron. But for what Ultron was in this movie, he came across more as a more lingering world threat. So even though I think his plan was very convoluted, I think James Spader's performance can be a little too mimicky of Robert Downey Jr. I did like it overall. And he did have a lot of cool scenes and a lot of cool interactions. And I just love James Spader singing the Pinocchio song "No Strings Attached" in that very sinister, calming voice. It just sends you chills. I love that stuff. It's good shit. So yeah, I think Ultron is actually a pretty decent villain. He ain't the best, but I do like him in terms of what he brought to the table, and he is a worthy adversary for the Avengers to take down in the overall grand scheme of things. In terms of the action sequences in this movie is riddled with full. Actually, let me talk about more with the cast. Like I said, Baron von Strucker does make an appearance in this movie by Thomas Kretschmann. He was set up to be a very interesting villain, and with Hydra now being revealed, it's actually a shame that they didn't really do much with Strucker as a character. He's just in the first 20. He's in the first 15 minutes. He gets captured. Then Ultron kills him off screen. His whole appearance leads to absolutely nothing. His only contribution is just giving Wanda and Pietro their powers. That's pretty much it. He does nothing. And then you have the Ulysses Claw, played by Andy Serkis. In the brief screen time that Andy Serkis played Ulysses Claw, I like it a lot. No, he comes across as just this very snarky type of guy, but also a guy who's not going to fall for any parlor tricks. So I enjoyed that. And of course, he loses his arm when he gets into a scuffle with Ultron. Of course, Claw was really there to set him up for Black Panther in the future. Speaking of which, this movie makes reference to Wakanda and vibranium, which was first established in Captain America: The First Avenger. That established vibranium. Age of Ultron, it tells us where vibranium came from, and of course this leads into Civil War, where we actually see Black Panther, T'Challa, and Wakanda. So, the seeds for Civil War were planted in Age of Ultron. So yeah, I like that. I like that little world building stuff. It's good stuff. It's good. Now we can talk about the action sequences. Even though I criticized the handling of Baron von Strucker, the whole siege of his hideout, it is a lot of fun. Seeing Wanda and Pietro use their powers, it is cool to see. Even though I think Pietro's powers are a little more underutilized than Wanda's, it still was fine. And all the Avengers, they all get their chances, they all get their time to shine. But the really big action set pieces is Hulk's rampage through Johannesburg and the entire third act, which takes place in Sokovia. That whole middle section, when they go to Hawkeye's farm, that's where the movie grinds to a screeching halt. Of course, we also find Nick Fury makes an appearance there, which sets up his role in the end with the helicarriers and Rhodey. Speaking of which, Rhodey and Falcon, they do make appearances in this movie, albeit very brief cameos. Falcon's inclusion is just to tell Steve that the leads to finding Bucky went cold, and that's pretty much it. Well, Rhodey, he makes an appearance during the party, and then he comes back at the end. I actually would have preferred if Rhodey stayed with the team from the party all the way to the climax instead of disappearing, and instead of disappearing for the majority of the movie. Same thing with Sam Wilson. Like this movie, like Age of Ultron, should have been the introduction of Falcon and War Machine as Avengers, and fully helping the Avengers out once Ultron gets activated. Like having Falcon and Rhodey be with them from start to finish, I think would have done much better, and it actually would have made the ending feel more grander when Steve Rogers saw what they can do in action, and that's when he wants to initiate them as Avengers. I think that would have been much better. Instead, Falcon does nothing. Like he literally has one conversation and he disappears, and Rhodey just pops in the third act and does like a little thing, and that's pretty much it. Like I think they're very underutilized in my opinion. I would have done much more with them. Mainly because I like the chemistry of Anthony Mackie and Chris Evans as Sam and Steve, and I would like to see more of that. And I can't get enough of Downey and Cheadle. Their bantering, their comedic bantering is just so good, and they work so well off one another. Disappointed with Josh Whedon with that one, which is a shame because Josh Whedon knows how to handle large ensemble casts and give everyone their chances to shine. So there's no reason why Falcon and War Machine couldn't have been in this movie more than what they really were. So yeah, that's a big gripe that I do have, along with Ultron's plot, which can be very convoluted and confusing in some areas. And also the creation of Vision, which is also a little convoluted. It's cool to see him, but getting there was a little clunky. And yeah, the stuff in the farm, some like this stuff, some don't like this stuff. I am indifferent to it. I mean, I like having the Avengers have a little downtime because you're also planting seeds for Civil War when Stark and Rogers have their little disagreement while chopping down wood. We get Nick Fury, who makes his appearance as well, which sets up to the whole climax in Sokovia, in which, Ultron tries to destroy an entire city, and the Avengers eventually stop him, with Vision getting the kill shot, and also Quicksilver sacrificing himself to save Hawkeye and a little boy. So yeah, the third act does have some decent good moments in it. And like I said, the end of the movie pretty much sees the Avengers more or less going into pseudo-retirement with Rogers and Black Widow, going into training for a new version of the team, which is going to feature Falcon and War Machine and Scarlet Witch going into Civil War. So yeah, and then of course you get the mid-credit scene of Thanos grabbing the Infinity Gauntlet and proclaiming that he's going to take care of business his way. So yeah, This movie did a really good job at setting up the events for Civil War and also teasing what was to come with Infinity War for Thanos. So yeah, at the end of the day, I do like Avengers: Age of Ultron. Oh, almost forgot. Almost forgot. The relationship between Black Widow and Hulk also sees a conclusion with Hulk basically taking a Quinjet and going into outer space. Of course, we all know where he ends up if you've seen Thor when we get to Thor Ragnarok. But I like how Hulk made the choice to not want to put Black Widow in danger, and he chose to just disappear, to no longer put anyone in harm's way. So I like that. It's a nice little character moment for the Hulk character and for Bruce Banner as a whole. Okay, now I can give my wraparound thoughts. Overall, I think Avengers: Age of Ultron, it is a good movie for what it is. It's not as good as the first Avengers movie. It does have some things in it that are a little too convoluted. The story is not as focused as the first Avengers movie, but it does have a lot of good things. And Josh Whedon did make a movie that is coherent enough that you can follow for the most part, and it is backed by fun performances and good action sequences. So, at the end of the day, I'm going to give Avengers: Age of Ultron, I'm going to give it a solid 7 out of 10. It's not as good as that first Avengers movie, but it also doesn't mean that it's a bad Avengers movie. It's a good Avengers movie. So yeah, 7 out of 10 for Age of Ultron. Let me know your thoughts in the comment sections down below. Like the video and subscribe, and I'll check you back next time for more.